Welcome. This is Karuna Live. It is Saturday, January 18th, 2025. And this is a recording of a Karuna Live event. You are welcome to watch this. There will be a talk and then some practice. My name is Miriam Hall. I use she, her pronouns, and I am on Ho-Chunk land. The name of the place is Daejeop in Ho-Chunk, which is colonially called Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm going to open just by acknowledging that the Karuna is based in the Arapaho and Utah lands, and that we are all over North America and Europe. And so there's a lot of different lands and indigenous holders of that land, both past and present. And we are also a predominantly white organization. So we're always working with that, just working with understanding that we're working with teachings from Tibet, predominantly on land that's been colonialized. And we're always not just acknowledging that, but actually working with it actively in relationship. This event is called Setting Your Compassion Compass. And the idea I had for this event is based on the idea of starting the new year, as someone said recently, the secular new year or samsara new year, like measuring the way that we measure the beginning of the calendar, Gregorian calendar. I also say that because there is a Tibetan New Year, usually toward the end of February, beginning of March. And a reminder that so many traditions start their year at different times in autumn, in spring, pretty much throughout the year. So I always like to remind myself and other people to put as little pressure on ourselves in the beginning of the year as you can. By January 18th, maybe you're not feeling it as much. This is actually a week that my colleague and friend, Lisa Renee Hall, because her birthday is this week, has researched and found out it's actually technically called Quitter's Week, because it's the week that folks historically, if they registered for a new gym or some other kind of New Year's resolution, they quit. Like on average, they quit at the third week of January. So fuck it, let's quit. Like, let's not set any high bars. And at the same time, let's check our compasses. And where is it that we're headed into in this year? What is it that we want to guide us? And so the idea is that if compassion feels like something we'd like to guide us, then we can start setting compassion as our compass. Those of you who know me, you know that I'm a word nerd. And so, of course, I love to look at the origins of words and how they break down. So compassion, of course, has the word compass in it, which is part of my wordplay in the title. And what compassion literally means is to feel with. And Karuna, the name of this program, Karuna Training, this organization, actually means compassion in Sanskrit. One of the things that we say in Karuna Training about compassion is that often we make some distinction between compassion practice for others and compassion practice for ourselves. There's been a lot of, in the kind of media and teachings and research on Buddhism and mindfulness, there's been a lot of emphasis on self-compassion practice. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's great, actually, that there's been so much emphasis. A lot of people are way too hard on themselves. And there's actually fundamentally no difference between self-compassion and compassion. I'll say more about that in a bit. But the description that I like is that we're a crossroads. So our ancestors, our former and future ancestors, the environment, our ecological environment, social environment, and our relationships, both intimate and societal, we're a crossroads of all those things. So we are never just experiencing our own experience. We're always also experiencing what's happening around us. And so even when we practice something that's ostensibly just for the self, it's going to benefit others. Not even because then we become nicer and we benefit others, but because we're not separate. And when we practice compassion for others, because we're a part of them, we also benefit. There's a long lineage of compassion. If you ask people sort of, what do you think Buddhism is about, potentially even about mindfulness, compassion is one of the first words that will come up. And yet it's often one of the most formal practices of compassion. It's often hidden in what's called the four divine abodes or the four immeasurables, which is sometimes called Maitri, Maitri practice. It's a Sanskrit term for loving kindness or unconditional love. Sometimes it's called metta practice, Metta, which is the Pali name for loving kindness or unconditional love. So often if people have familiarity with a compassion practice, what they have familiarity with is May these beings be free from suffering and the root of all suffering. That's often the expression that comes in Maitri or metta practice. When people talk about Maitri or metta practice, usually what they mean is actually a collection. It's not just Maitri, it's also Karuna, compassion. It's also sympathetic, what's called sympathetic joy, mudita, and then also equanimity, upekkha. So these are all Sanskrit terms for those four parts of our experience. And they're considered divine qualities that we all naturally have. We may not always be able to access them, but they are actually limitless. They don't have limit. So that even though often people don't realize that they might be doing compassion practice as a part of loving kindness practice, it's one of the aspects of loving kindness practice. A common image for compassion, common symbol is what's called the lotus, right? The flower called the lotus. And the lotus is famous for being a flower that grows out of the muck. So it likes slimy, mucky areas. I live on the north side of Madison near a few marshes, and lotuses love these marshes. And sometimes if you go in a kayak or a canoe and you're able to get close to the lotuses, they're actually literally surrounded by muck, like dead plants of other kinds, last year's lotuses. So if you look just at the flower, which is often, if you like get a calendar with lotuses on it, you won't see any of the mucky, nasty background, but it can actually smell around lotuses. It smells like rotten plant detritus. And I love that. And the image of the lotus is there to remind us that basically enlightenment, awakenment, compassion in this case, comes out of suffering. So most often what compassion is used for is not just to feel with, it's to feel with suffering, specifically, to be with suffering. And I think that that often gets romanticized, like the more you suffer, the more awake you are. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. It's just not, as fortunately or unfortunately, just because we've suffered a lot doesn't mean that we have much awareness of what that suffering is or what it means. And just because we've suffered a lot doesn't mean that we've experienced compassion from others, right? A lot of times we tend to distance ourselves from other people's suffering, even our own suffering. So that's all to say that it's a little messy. The compassion is messy. It's both really beautiful when it flowers, and it also can get confusing and weird. There's a lot of potential room for projection. What am I feeling versus what are you feeling? If I've experienced something similar to what you're experiencing, it's good to be able to use that to connect through empathy, to actually have our feeling go out and connect and come back. But if we just assume that they're having the same experience we are, then we're not honoring the fact that they're having their own experience. And I think what is most important and what we're going to focus on today is how we often skip the step of being with what is, of actually feeling what we're experiencing when we try to practice for others. There are ample opportunities for compassion practice for the external world right now. Ample. So many places of suffering. They fill our media streams, they fill our social media streams, and for a lot of us, they fill our hearts. So we don't need to go very far to find a being or beings or a place or a land that are suffering in such a way, and we wish that they could be free of that suffering, genuinely. And at the same time, one thing that can happen is we focus so much on that external pain that we don't tend to our own pain. We're actually not present for what we're experiencing, because there's a paradox here about the self and other compassion, right? You are actually involved when you're feeling for someone else. You're not just an empty husk that happens, this compassion experience is passing through. You're an actual feeling being. So in order to feel with and to feel how you're interconnected, we need to actually feel what we're experiencing. And that's a piece that I know I skip a lot, and I find a lot of folks skip, that we just try to somehow abstractly feel for others, or we get flooded by their experience, which often happens for folks who are pretty empathic. It's like a tap gets turned on and we can't stop it. And we're feeling everything, right? Whether or not that we have the news on. And what's tricky is that flooding actually makes it impossible for us to practice compassion in a way that's beneficial for us. and often that's beneficial for others. Being flooded, feeling with, doesn't give us enough room to actually be ourselves as well. So we're feeling a lot of something, we're taking it in, but we're not actually also here inside of ourselves and able to be with ourselves and feel with. We can't witness in the same way because we're so flooded. So even though it might seem counterintuitive, being able to actually feel what we're feeling, and in particular, tapping into our felt sensations, is a helpful way to ground ourselves in the present moment, be with what we're experiencing, and make sure that's a part of our experience of compassion. It's a way of expressing compassion toward ourselves that does, in fact, expand our capacity for being with the suffering of others. So, this practice in Karuna training is, I feel like, an important practice at the base of any other compassion practice. So there are other compassion practices, including something called Tonglen, where you exchange yourself for other. You feel others suffering, you take it in like a purification machine, and you pass it through and back out with wishes for relief from that suffering. Also a powerful compassion practice. Also completely overwhelming if we're not able to actually be with our own suffering or if we're getting flooded. So the practice that I'm going to introduce and guide helps us to be more present and able to have the capacity that we need in order to do any other compassion practice as well. Just going to pause and see if there are any questions. Great. So someone asked me to say a bit more about the difference between empathy and compassion, and in particular, that feeling of being so porous that we absorb a lot of the intensity of what's happening in a social situation, in an intimate way, large scale, any number of ways that we can soak it in. And curiosity about what is that compassion when we're actually feeling with. There are so many different ways to break down empathy, sympathy, compassion, etc. But what I will say is, in this definition of compassion and this way of working with it, and I want to be really clear that there's zero judgment in this. There's not like, oh, but you're not doing the right thing. It's just feeling. There's no judgment about it. What happens with empathy is more that we receive people's feeling, but we can't actually be with it because we're not able to be with ourselves. And that, when we get overwhelmed when we're having empathy, if we're having kind of a not overly porous situation, right, where we're just feeling into a situation, then we can feel, and then that empathy can feed compassion, basically, right? Like, oh, I feel you, and now I can feel with you. I am also feeling my feelings with you, not just feeling you. But if we're only feeling you, if we're only feeling the other person or the other people, and we're not able to feel ourselves, we're not able to set boundaries. We're not able to get clear about where do we need to pause that. Let me be with myself so I can take care of my needs so that I can be more present. And I think that's what compassion practice actually asks us to do, is to feel out when we're flooded so much that we need to back up and take some self-care. These are all offerings to consider. They are not written in stone law. And as I said, there are so many different ways to parse that out. And I think what's important is to not feel penalized in some way, right? Like, that's just empathy. That's not compassion. No, that's a keystone. If we don't have empathy, good luck having compassion, right? Empathy and compassion both have pathos. They both have feeling in them. We can feel the suffering of someone else. The question is, can we be with it? And that so much of that is building our own capacity so that we can be with our own and other people's at the same time, which is tricky. And I'm sure there are spontaneous moments of that arising for people. I know, as somebody who's pretty empathic, I get spontaneous moments of compassion where I can feel myself and them at the same time. And there are plenty of times when I can only feel myself and plenty of times when I can only feel them. So rather than some ideal we're aiming for, it's noticing and discerning when there's that difference. And I think one of the things that, again, is really important is when we do something that could be labeled a self-compassion practice, which the practice that we're going to do could be labeled a self-compassion practice. Again, it's not just that we give ourselves more capacity so we can have capacity for others. It's also some kind of, we can't really understand how this works, but it does work. When we are able to be with what we're experiencing, because what we experience is never just ours, we are also with others. So sometimes people poo poo self compassion practice because they see self as separate from other, but because we're not separate, when we're with the strands of our experience, which include others, but also include ourselves, then it both increases our capacity and actually helps us be with others in the present moment. So in Karuna, we really focus on what's called felt sense, recognizing when we are having a sensory experience. And the reason why we focus on felt sense or sensory experience is because, first of all, it's there all the time. It's our basic data stream, our constant basic data stream, like what's coming in through our classical senses, what's happening in the sixth sense, which is our mind, and our awareness and ability to recognize we're having those experiences. All of that comes before deciding what it means, judging it, assessing it, good, bad, symbolic of. And there's nothing wrong with assessing what an experience means. So I was having some digestive trouble earlier, luckily not now, and I need some discernment. Does that mean that I'm nervous? Does it mean that I'm sick? Does it mean that I need X or Y? Right? That discernment is fine. But if I'm not able to actually be with what I'm experiencing, actually be with the pain in my gut, then there's going to be a subtle to severe added layer of suffering. So basically, we can make our suffering worse by not being able to be with it. This is not to say that you can fix chronic pain or recovering from back surgery or IBS or anything else. This is not a miracle cure. But what it does is help alleviate the suffering enough so that we can actually read what's happening and feel it out, which helps us be, especially with pain that has no fundamental solution. So trying to be with things like genocide, trying to be with things like earthquakes and fires. Part of the reason why they get so overwhelming is that there's no immediate solution. There's nothing that we can fix. There's nothing anybody can actually fix, at least immediately. And so being able to be with things as they are and not try to fix it is really hard for a lot of us. And it starts with ourselves, recognizing when something is not fixable, or even that something that we're experiencing that we'd like to go away, the harder we try to make it go away, the more it stays. I have multiple chronic conditions that I work with. And for me, this practice has been crucial for not making it worse. The other thing that I notice is when I do this practice is that I notice that my experiences are intermittent. Our experiences seem really solid because we have this solid sense of self. We think that the gut pain is constant. But when we can actually attend to it, we notice that we're in a lot of pain and then not as much, and then a little bit of pain and then not as much, and then a whole bunch of pain back and forth. Physical and psychic pain are like that. They come and they go. And we can actually recognize when it's going and take some respite in that. I feel like that's similar right now for Gaza, right? There's a ceasefire that's coming on, and there's a lot of mixed feelings from a lot of folks I know because on the one hand, we've been asking for a ceasefire for a long time. On the other hand, it's actually only a partial ceasefire, and there's no guarantee that it will last in Palestine. So being able to celebrate at least some ceasefire is important, while also still being able to be with, my God, when will this ever really end? So this practice also helps us recognize what's good about the moment, what's happening that's good and supportive. The practice is called the four-step practice. That's a generic name. In Karuna, we tend to call it the FEEL practice, FEEL, because it's an acronym for the four steps. And when we say feel here, we don't so much mean feeling like emotions, except for that we understand that emotions are energy. So if I have a felt experience of my throat closing up, my chest getting sore, I'm very, very commonly going to say I'm getting sad. And there's nothing wrong with saying sad, and can I just stay with my throat closing up in my chest without labeling it? So recognizing that because emotions come and go, if we let them come and they will go. If we let them come and we let them go, they will go. If I get caught on it, oh my God, I'm getting sad. Does that mean I'm getting depressed? Oh, but if I get depressed, I can't do X. Now I've wrapped myself into a whole story where actually I'm pretty attached to the sadness. That's certainly not the only way that depression can happen. I'm just naming my own cycle. So the first step of feel, you want to work with something one thing at a time, can be a physical experience that you're having, or it can be an emotional experience. Everybody experiences things differently. So for some folks, if I say something like throat closing up equals I'm sad, they're like, oh yeah, I totally have that. I know that when my right arm is sore, it means that I'm feeling X, or when my guts ache, it means that I'm probably feeling Y. So some of us are very used to somatic expressions of our emotions. Some of us are not. And in that case, if you're just having a physical experience that you don't feel so great about, would really sort of rather that it's not happening, then you can work with that. You don't have to worry about if there's an emotion attached. Or if you're having an emotion that feels like, oh, I don't know about this. I don't really want to be with this. You can just practice being with that, and we'll get curious to see if there are any associations, not just in your body, but also any images that arise, any textures or colors or other experiences. So the first step is to find one thing. I know I just gave a bunch of options, is to find some one thing in your experience that you're uncomfortable with. It's not causing the world's worst experience, but it's also not nothing. And you'd rather that it go away. Just taking a moment to find an experience that fits in that category. Sometimes when you say that, people are like, Miriam, I got a 10 out of 10. This pain is so bad, I can't focus on anything else. That's okay. And we'll work with that best we can. And also to name that you may be feeling nothing, a sense of numbness or just blankness. That too is an experience that we can work with. Make sure to choose one if you haven't already. And if you're really like, I sincerely have nothing, I have no idea, this practice makes no sense, just pick an area of your body that you're curious about and you'd like to check out a bit more. It feels medium. Maybe sometimes it causes you pain, but not right now. That's fine. The second step, the first E, is explore. Often what happens when we have uncomfortable experiences, the second step is think about it a lot. So the second step here is explore. Notice the physical characteristics. So if it's physical pain or discomfort, is it loud? Is it quiet? Is it throbbing or is it stable? Is it hot or cold? If it's an emotional or mental experience, maybe you could check out its speed. Is it moving quickly or slowly? Is there a scent or a flavor or a color? And again, if you're feeling like, I got nothing, I don't understand this, and just resting with that. Maybe right now that you're overwhelmed, now's not a good time to go exploring anything. Just being as kind with yourself as you can. And maybe that your imagination kicks in and memories has come up. A memory that you have associated with you didn't even know with this part of your body, your emotions, or your mind. And the third step, Another E, the second E, is embrace. The traditional instruction is to treat this experience that you're noticing and witnessing and feeling like a best friend or a lover and give it a big hug, warm sense of unconditional love. But I frankly find that some parts of my experience are really fucking prickly and don't like to be hugged, especially non consensually. So it might look more just like acknowledgement, a smile and a nod. I see you, I hear you, I know you're here. Some sense of connection, warmth, acknowledgement can be as warm and fuzzy as you and the experience want, or as distant as is needed. And the last step, L, is to let it go. So, inherent in this is the understanding that our experiences come and they go. This is not force it to go. This is not make it go away. This is if it's ready to go, let it go. And when we're quite focused on an experience, it can feel as if it's impossible to let go. So, another thing that can help with this is to slowly open our eyes if they've been closed and feel into the space around us, letting this experience mix with space. Again, you're not forcing it to go, but you're recognizing this is only one part of my experience. There's a lot of other experience going on. Letting yourself also feel parts of your body that aren't uncomfortable, that are neutral or even pleasurable. Letting yourself notice that you have other thoughts, not just these hard thoughts, other emotions, not just this emotion. And if it's ready to go, giving it a really gentle as you can, a gentle wave. And if it's not ready to go, let it shift. Let yourself notice as anything shifted. Is the sharpness a little softer? The loudness a little quieter? It was flowing, is it ebbing? And subtle differences are important. Sometimes we think nothing is changing if the whole thing doesn't change. Just pay attention to the subtle shifts. Taking a moment to move your body if it's been still, and if that feels good to you, just some gentle wiggles. Wherever you're at right now is okay. Maybe you feel no different. You haven't failed, if that's true. It's just what's happening now. And just to close the video and the recording, you can do this practice recorded. This recording will be here. I have a recording of it on Insight Timer. If you want to look up Miriam Hall, I have an Insight Timer recording of it there. You can come to other Karuna Lives where this is offered, but also trust that this is actually a natural process although it might feel a little awkward to do the steps separately, this is a natural process and it can happen quickly. It can happen so quickly. We name, we know what's happening, we feel it, we hold it, we let it go. Or it can happen as slowly as you need. And that it really is the foundation of compassion. Make sure that we're able to feel what's going on for us so that we can be feeling with others, not just feeling what they're feeling, but also what we're feeling. And just to encourage folks who are watching the recording, we have so many opportunities, podcasts, Karuna Lives, and we have a cohort that's starting in late May in California that any of you would be welcome to join. I hope that this helps support you in your feeling with and gives you a little compass direction for your new year. I recently did a program called Setting Your Compassion Compass. And then when we turned the recording off, I got some clarifying questions that really brought something forward that I want to make sure gets expressed. It was kind of a new understanding for me, a nuance that I think will be useful to a lot of folks. And what happened is that one of the folks who was asking about the difference between empathy and compassion was concerned about the fact that they already feel a lot. I was saying during the presentation, like, it's important for us to feel what we're actually experiencing. And what I think I was trying to get at, but never quite got at absolutely directly, and was actually kind of discovering as I said it, is that for me, compassion, so compassion with feeling with, is different than empathy in a key way. That empathy is feeling for someone, which is something we actually say in English. We use that preposition. We say, I'm feeling for you. And or we try to feel someone's pain. So feel it for them or with them. My spouse and I were just joking around. They had a tag sticking in their waist. They hated it. They cut it out. And then they came over and rubbed it against my skin. And I said, no, I don't want that experience either. And they said jokingly, I want you to feel my pain. And that is actually often what we do when we think we're doing compassion. We are actually trying to feel exactly what the other person is feeling. We are literally putting ourselves in their shoes. And what that does, there's nothing wrong with that. Lots of us are wired to do that, and it's powerful. And if we do that, we become ungrounded. We're in someone else's shoes, not in ours. So what we need to be able to do, what we want to practice doing, is being able to, yes, imagine and be in someone else's shoes, and then come back to our own and feel what's true for us. So for me, the difference between compassion and empathy is empathy, and especially when empathy floods us and we're quite empathic, we get stuck in someone else's shoes. So empathy is, I'm feeling overwhelmed by it, is like, I can't stop feeling for other people. I can't stop feeling other people. What makes a difference with compassion for me, and again, this is my definition, my use of it, although I don't think it's far off, is that I oscillate between feeling myself and feeling them. Now, make sure I come back to me as well. Not me finally, not me as the ultimate resource or the only truth, but me too. So I feel me and I feel them. I feel me and I feel them. And I'm able to both discern what's theirs and what's mine, and also feel how that's not always so clear. It's not so black and white, not so binary, and that there's a field of feeling, and tap into that. But what makes the difference is if I'm actually feeling, especially if I'm actually feeling my sensations, whether that's interoceptively, feeling them inside of my body, or if that's not available to us, feeling my senses in contact with the external world, exteroceptively. If I can touch base with my senses, not so much I'm sad or I'm angry or whatever the emotion is, but with the sensory experience, that helps ground us in this present moment. I am here. I am not 5 years ago or 20 years ago. I'm not triggered or not triggered as much or activated, or as said in the generative somatics movement, I am not time traveling. I'm actually in this present moment. I'm feeling with them alongside them. They're having feelings, I'm having feelings, and I'm able to tap into both. When we know what we're feeling as well, when we're grounded in that, we can set better boundaries. So we can realize that there are some people who will continuously manipulate the fact that we are feeling for them, that we are trying to recognize what they're feeling, and we'll center it on them. and not give us the time or space or capacity in relationship to actually feel our own stuff. And then we might need to take breaks so that we can actually have the room to feel our own stuff. We might even recognize that we're just not skilled enough to do that yet. And so we need to take breaks, not because the other person is doing something wrong. I think that muscle of building the muscle of oscillation, the muscle of being able to feel myself and feel them, helps us be much more discerning in relationship. Not so much discerning like, I'm not going to talk with that person again, ever again, but discerning like, when is this supporting me? When am I getting what I need? When am I able to stay present with this person in their experience? And when am I not? And then from that information, we can make better decisions about what kind of care is actually helpful. How can we actually be helpful in a way that doesn't completely drain us and actually helps the other person get what they need, or at least just have them be witnessed in a really sincere way? Because when we get totally flooded, when we take on someone else's pain and we're not present for our own, we lose out, and so do they. And none of this is you're doing it the wrong way or the bad way. I'm constantly practicing with all these things myself. But I thought it might be helpful, especially in a time when there's a lot coming at us. There has been for at least a couple of years now, genocides and global climate disasters, and so many consequences coming our way, and especially in the US and the weeks since the inauguration and election, that we tune in. Am I actually feeling myself right now? Am I able to actually notice my own experience? And if not, can I pause, especially if I'm choosing this interaction or choosing this media? Can I pause until I can feel myself? So that way I can actually experience and feel compassion and not get lost in the other person or lost in someone else's pain. So I want to offer that as a follow-up, because that was a helpful discernment for me that didn't really fully come through. I feel like it was something that was trying to come out during the exchange, but didn't until I turned off the recording. Take deep care. That includes taking care of you as part of an interrelated, interdependent situation.